There exists a hidden, silent, yet omnipresent force that weaves together the threads of faith, culture, economy, and consciousness. We go about our lives believing that these spheres operate independently, that spirituality belongs to the soul, culture is merely a social ornament, the economy is a market equation, and consciousness is a personal phenomenon. But this separation is a manufactured illusion. What pulses beneath the surface of reality is an intricate, subtle network, often unnoticed, like the wind that stirs the leaves but remains unseen. Most people live unaware that all their actions, decisions, and thoughts are quietly influenced by systems that feed off one another, perpetuating age-old patterns of power, control, and belief. The moment you wake up and choose how to spend your day, you might think you're making decisions on your own. However, every choice is deeply rooted in a vast sea of symbols and structures. You decide to work, but why? To earn money. But what exactly is money? It's a collective symbol of value. Who determined that value? It's a cultural construct, supported by social beliefs that have been historically shaped by systems of faith. Your perspective on work, the value of life, rewards, and even what you feel you deserve is influenced by an invisible fabric that intertwines religious doctrines, cultural narratives, and economic systems. There is no neutrality. We are all part of a mental framework that defines what is possible to desire, achieve, and even dream about. For centuries, kings and priests understood this. They didn't just rule with swords, they wielded myths, doctrines, and currency. The true throne has always been symbolic. It wasn't found in palaces, but in the collective imagination. Today, the institutions have changed, but the game remains the same. Central banks, large corporations, spiritual leaders, and global media form the new pillars that uphold the narrative. The difference? In the past, we knew we were being governed. Today, we believe we are free. And it's this belief that fuels the system. Freedom has become a slogan in a game where the rules are already written, and no one questions who holds the pen. Faith, for instance, has evolved beyond mere devotion to the transcendent. It has become a behavioral framework that dictates what is considered right, acceptable, or moral. No matter how much you claim to be non-religious, you still adhere to the inherited structures of the dominant spirituality in your culture, the morals that guide your decisions, the value you place on wealth versus humility, and your concepts of guilt or merit. All of these have been shaped by ancient doctrines that continue to resonate, even if quietly. This subtle faith intertwines with culture, creating a collective identity that asserts, this is how things are. But are they? Culture, in essence, is more than just art, dance, or tradition. It serves as the source code of our collective mindset. Through culture, you learn what is considered normal, what defines success, and what constitutes failure. It shapes your tastes, your judgments, and your self-esteem. It even influences your silence. A person raised in a culture of scarcity is likely to believe they must fight for everything. In contrast, someone nurtured in a culture of abundance will see opportunities everywhere. Yet, both believe they are simply seeing the world as it is. Therefore, culture does not reveal the truth. It presents a version of the truth, carefully crafted to maintain a specific balance of power and narrative. And then there's the economy. What seems like a technical system grounded in numbers and cold logic is actually a deeply intertwined web of human beliefs and expectations. Money is one of humanity's most spiritual creations, not because it elevates us, but because it exists solely because we believe in it. It's a collective faith. A piece of paper, a digital figure, holds value only because we all agree to assign it worth. This agreement is invisible, emotional, and cultural. When that faith wavers, like during financial crises, we realize that the economy is far less rational than we thought. And when that faith collapses, the entire system shakes. And what about consciousness? Perhaps the most enigmatic aspect of all. It is within consciousness that everything manifests, and from it, that everything emerges. Consciousness serves as the invisible stage where faith, culture, and economy play their roles. Yet it is also the only force capable of interrupting the script and asking, who wrote this? Without consciousness, we are merely pieces reacting to inherited stimuli. With consciousness, we begin to see the board, and in some cases, we can choose to step off it. However, awakening this consciousness requires courage. It's much easier to remain asleep in the comfort of inherited narratives than to confront the void before creating new answers. The invisible force that drives us isn't inherently evil. However, when it remains unconscious, it can become a prison. Blind faith turns into fanaticism. Rigid culture morphs into prejudice. A soulless economy breeds greed. A dormant consciousness leads to alienation. The silent web is only dangerous because it makes us believe we're outside of it. But we are inside it. We always have been. The question isn't whether we're connected, but whether we recognize it and what we will do with that awareness. Behind every great civilization lies a hidden axis that connects mythology, economic power, and spiritual structure. Ancient Egypt didn't just build pyramids with stone and mathematics, they constructed them with religious symbols and highly organized social systems. Rome didn't conquer merely through military might, but through cultural and spiritual control. Modern empires operate in much the same way, albeit under different banners. In all these instances, ordinary people believed they were living in accordance with the natural course of life, when in reality they were following a carefully crafted script. Today, this script is digital. It's in our phones, embedded in algorithms, and stored in databases. Faith has transformed into a technological narrative, culture has been reduced to trends, the economy hides behind interfaces, and our awareness is constantly distracted by notifications. The network has become more complex, yet also more vulnerable. The more sophisticated it gets, the more it relies on our attention. And attention is the gold of this new era. Whoever controls your attention controls your reality. So, if everything is interconnected, what can we do? The answer isn't out there, it's within us. It starts with the decision to see, to pause, to ask yourself, who wrote my certainties? Where did my desires come from? Why do I value what I value? This initial act of questioning is the beginning of liberation. It's the moment you realize that you can finally step out of autopilot and take ownership of your own experience. In this video, we're going to dive deep, not with ready-made answers, but with questions that open up new perspectives. Together, we'll weave the invisible threads that connect the four pillars quietly shaping our lives: faith, culture, economy, and awareness. By the end, you might realize that this web has never been your enemy. It has simply been waiting for you to awaken and take your place as the weaver. Are you ready to see what has always been right in front of you? Since the dawn of civilization, humanity has sought meaning in existence. The pain of mortality, the mystery of our origins, the silence of the stars at night, everything cries out for answers. It is in this primordial void that faith was born. However, what few realize is that faith has never been just a connection to the sacred. Above all, it serves as a system for encoding reality. Each religion, each doctrine, each spiritual belief acts as a symbolic map that profoundly shapes how individuals perceive the world, themselves, and others. These codes are not neutral, they program behaviors, define power structures, create concepts of right and wrong, and establish who should be followed or condemned. The world's major religions didn't just appear by chance. They emerged as sophisticated systems of social and spiritual organization that helped stabilize entire societies. Yet, at their core, they all share something in common: the creation of a symbolic language that translates the invisible into practices, rituals, and laws. This language is so deeply rooted that it continues to shape societies even when people claim to no longer believe. Sunday remains a day of rest in many countries, not by coincidence, but because an ancient commandment has been culturally ingrained. Weddings, funerals, births, all bear the imprint of this invisible coding of faith. The impact of this coding goes far beyond organized religion. Even in modern atheism, there exists a form of faith. Faith in science, faith in logic, faith in reason as the sole path to truth. Humans need to believe in something to navigate the chaos of existence. The beliefs we choose shape our experiences. However, this choice is rarely made consciously. From an early age, we are immersed in a web of inherited beliefs passed down from our parents, schools, and society, presented as absolute truths. Few take a moment to ask, where does this come from? Who decided what is right or wrong, sacred or profane? Throughout history, many wise figures have sought to break free from this programming. Jesus, Buddha, Socrates, Lao Tzu, all were, in their own way, revolutionaries of consciousness. They challenged the prevailing narratives, broke away from the doctrines of their time, and invited their followers on a journey of inner truth. Yet, ironically, their messages were transformed into new doctrines, new codes, and new institutions. Living faith became institutional faith. The symbolic language of the soul turned into dogma. Rebellion became rule. This illustrates the immense power of faith as a structure. It can absorb even its fiercest opponents and turn them into monuments to the very system they sought to transcend. The process of institutionalizing faith has had profound economic, political, and cultural consequences. The Catholic Church, for instance, was one of the most powerful institutions in the world for centuries, amassing wealth, land, and political influence. Similarly, Islamic empires established legal codes, business practices, and even governance structures based on Sharia law. Faith has always been intertwined with the economy, determining who could engage in trade, what was considered fair to charge, and which professions were deemed respectable. Today, these connections may seem diluted, but they still persist in subtle ways. Contemporary capitalism, for example, is rooted in the Protestant work ethic, which views hard work as a sign of divine grace, a concept brilliantly articulated by Max Weber. Moreover, faith operates with tremendous energy. Each belief creates an egregore, a collective entity formed by the minds of millions who share the same conviction. These egregores thrive on the emotions, devotion, and fears of the masses. They can sway political decisions, influence elections, and drive social movements. They have the power to ignite wars or inspire healing. The more unconscious they are, the more dangerous they become. Blind, unquestioned faith can justify horrific acts. History is filled with examples of genocides, crusades, persecutions, and colonialism fueled by religious rhetoric. Yet the origins of this force are rarely scrutinized. But faith is also liberating. When fully realized, it becomes a lever for transcendence. It connects us to something greater, inviting us to step beyond the illusion of the ego and experience wholeness. Mystical traditions have always understood this. Sufis, Kabbalists, Gnostics, and yogis have all sought to go beyond the veil of doctrines to touch the sacred directly, without intermediaries, and for this, they faced persecution, because direct contact with the divine frees individuals from the need for systems, hierarchies, and power structures. A being connected to the source cannot be manipulated. This has always been the greatest fear of those who control the network. There's also an unconscious faith that operates beneath the surface of our culture. When you believe you have to work yourself to the bone to be worthy of love or respect, that's faith. When you think money is dirty or that spirituality means giving things up, that's faith too. When you feel you were born to suffer or that you can't thrive without guilt, that's faith as well. Not a conscious faith, but a programmed belief, inherited and internalized through repetition. These silent codes act like invisible software that shapes your identity, your boundaries, your desires, and your possibilities. They can only be reprogrammed when brought into the light of awareness. The language of faith is symbolic. It communicates through myths, archetypes, metaphors, and stories. This is what makes it so powerful. A well-told story can transform an entire life. It can overturn limiting beliefs, heal ancestral wounds, and open portals of perception. The parables of Jesus, Sufi tales, and indigenous stories, all of these narratives hold keys to liberation. However, when interpreted literally, they lose their potency. A symbol becomes a prison when it's mistaken for reality. That's why it's essential to read with the eyes of the soul, not the conditioned mind. By understanding that faith is a hidden language that shapes our worldview, we begin to reclaim our power. We can choose what to believe. We can question the codes. We can rewrite our beliefs. This doesn't mean abandoning faith. It means transforming it. From inherited faith to a living faith, from blind faith to awakened faith, from imposed faith to chosen faith. And this choice is revolutionary. It breaks the silent web at its most vulnerable point, the realm of unconscious acceptance. When we stop accepting without questioning, the system starts to crumble. At this point, you might feel some discomfort. That's completely normal. Faith touches deep, intimate, foundational places within us. Questioning it can feel like betrayal. Yet it's precisely this fear that shows how much it holds us captive. Spiritual freedom isn't about believing more or less. It's about consciously choosing what you believe and why. It's about understanding that every belief system is, above all, a symbolic, cultural, and historical construct. The divine, the true divine, cannot be contained within any doctrine. It resides within you. It always has. Faith serves as the map, but it's up to you to decide the destination you want to reach. Culture is the invisible lens that shapes our reality. It's not just found in history books, museums, or folk dances. It's in the way we shake hands, the silences we consider respectful, the glances we avoid, and the words we choose to describe time, love, failure, and success. Everything is filtered through it. Culture is the operating system of humanity, the code behind our choices, habits, values, and even our fears. What's most intriguing is that, like invisible software, it runs its functions without us even noticing. We rarely stop to consider, where do the ideas that govern our way of life come from? Who decided what is beautiful, normal, acceptable, or shameful? Culture isn't just an accessory, it's the foundation of everything. It shapes language, and language shapes thought. The way we speak defines what we are capable of thinking. If a culture lacks words for inner freedom, how can one fully experience it? When a society lacks symbols to describe elevated states of consciousness, recognizing those states becomes challenging. Thus, culture not only reflects the collective consciousness, but also limits, organizes, and tames it. And when necessary, it suppresses it. The collective unconscious expresses itself through culture just as a body communicates through gestures. Throughout history, empires have been built not just with armies, but with narratives. The Romans conquered the world through law, the Greeks through philosophy, the English with the concept of civilization, and the Americans with the myth of freedom. Each spread their culture as if it were a universal truth, but it was merely their version of reality. When one culture supersedes another, it's not just a matter of exchanging habits, it's a reprogramming of the collective imagination. That's why colonizers didn't just destroy temples, they also eradicated languages, myths, songs, and memories. They understood that to dominate a soul, one must first erase its symbolic map. Culture also shapes our desires. We don't desire what we truly want. Rather, we crave what we've been conditioned to want. From the moment we're born, we're bombarded with cultural models that dictate what success looks like, what is considered beautiful, and what deserves love or rejection. This programming is so powerful that many spend their entire lives chasing ideals that aren't their own, but rather inherited from society. A woman might loathe herself for not fitting the beauty standards of her time, oblivious to the fact that those standards are a cultural construct. A man may feel like a failure for not achieving a specific type of status that his culture values, even if he is at peace with himself. Culture plants the seeds of comparison, guilt, and inadequacy. And here's the subtle part. Culture also defines the boundaries of what is possible. In cultures where spirituality is woven into daily life, elevated states of consciousness are seen as normal. In cultures dominated by materialism, spiritual experiences are often regarded as eccentric. This means that our worldview is either narrowed or expanded by our surroundings. Picture a child growing up in an environment where miracles are considered commonplace. She will have an open mind to the extraordinary. Now, imagine a child raised under the weight of scarcity and guilt. Her perception will be shaped by limitation. Culture doesn't just inform, it shapes, and if left unexamined, it can distort. Culture is not static. It evolves over time, shaped by interactions between peoples and the development of consciousness. However, the core elements of cultures, such as their foundational myths, taboos, and central values, can endure for centuries, sometimes even millennia. It is within these core elements that the greatest challenges lie. They form the bedrock of our economies, politics, and beliefs. A culture rooted in guilt will give rise to punitive religions, scarcity-driven economies, and systems of control. In contrast, a culture founded on honor and abundance will foster entirely different structures. Culture serves as the starting point for all the other pillars of this silent network. Companies are well aware of this. Advertising is a form of cultural engineering. It's not just about selling a product, it's about selling a lifestyle, an idea, a feeling. When a brand aligns itself with concepts like freedom, youth, or success, it's manipulating cultural symbols to create subjective value. And that value drives trillions in revenue. Marketing operates not only on a rational level but also on an archetypal one. It taps into ancestral memories, fears, and desires. In this way, culture also becomes a tool for economic control. Those who control the symbols control the desires, and those who control the desires control the flow of money. Culture is also a transmitter of trauma. What one generation fails to heal, the next one repeats or carries forward. Racism, sexism, homophobia, classism. These are not just individual failings, they are cultural codes passed down through the centuries. Contrary to popular belief, it's not enough to simply refrain from perpetuating these issues. We must actively reprogram them. We need to question and rethink our symbols, stories, and rituals. Without this effort, culture continues to act like a shadow, repeating toxic patterns under the guise of tradition. Achieving cultural liberation is one of the most challenging tasks in the journey of awakening consciousness, as it requires us to let go of the illusion of belonging. There is also an invisible culture of suffering that exists in many societies. In these cultures, pain is valued as noble, sacrifice is seen as the highest virtue, and renunciation is viewed as a sign of purity. This isn't spirituality, it's conditioning. A healthy culture doesn't suppress pleasure, condemn success, or glorify scarcity. However, unhealthy cultures teach the opposite, leading people to sabotage themselves out of fear of thriving or achieving their potential. This self-sabotage is cultural, and it will only be undone when there is a collective courage to redefine what we understand as virtue, merit, and worth. The way forward lies in awareness. When we recognize culture as a system, like software, we can start to choose our own codes. We can reclaim the beauty, symbolism, and depth found in our traditions while discarding what is toxic, limiting, or outdated. Culture isn't a prison, it's a language, and every language can be reinvented. The danger comes from failing to see it. When culture remains invisible, it holds power over us. But when we bring it into the light, we can reshape it. True power lies in the ability to tell our own story. In a globalized world where cultures intertwine every second, the challenge grows, but so do the opportunities. We can draw from a multitude of sources, learn from various traditions, blend knowledge, and create new ways of living, loving, working, and celebrating. The culture of the future will be hybrid, symbiotic, and regenerative, or it may simply repeat the blind traumas of the past. The choice lies in how we awaken to this system and decide to engage with it, as victims or as creators. Money is perhaps the most powerful symbol of the modern age. It's not just a medium of exchange, it's a living entity, an abstract construct that has the ability to govern behaviors, dictate priorities, and reshape entire societies. What's most remarkable, however, is that it exists solely because we believe in it. There's no intrinsic value in a banknote, a coin, or a digital number. What underpins the global financial system isn't gold or productivity, but collective trust, a silent faith that supports markets, banks, and empires. This invisible faith is the link between the economy and spirituality. Because, at its core, money operates much like a religion. It demands belief, imposes rituals, establishes promises and penalties, creates priests, and above all, mobilizes crowds. The history of money is essentially the story of how humans have assigned value. In the early days, we used objects like shells, stones, or salt to represent wealth. Then came precious metals, bartering systems, and coins stamped with the faces of kings, symbols of concentrated power. Later on, banks began issuing paper currency, initially backed by gold. Today, most money exists in digital form, made up of bits, spreadsheets, and digits that flow through servers and clouds, invisible to the naked eye yet real enough to build skyscrapers or topple nations. Throughout all these phases, the underlying logic has remained the same, attributing value to something symbolic, supported by a collective belief. Money has never been merely material, it has always been spiritual. The modern financial system is a complex web of beliefs, expectations, and emotions. Markets don't respond to facts. They react to interpretations. A statement from a president, inflation expectations, or a profit forecast. Each of these can shift trillions based on perception. Investors aren't dealing with reality. They're navigating projections, and these projections are shaped by narratives. In this way, the economy becomes a symbolic stage where myths, fears, and hopes collide. A stock market crash isn't merely a reflection of negative numbers, it represents a collapse of confidence. The 2008 crisis wasn't just financial, it was spiritual. It marked a break in the faith that underpins the system. This economic faith is ritualized. We work countless hours in exchange for symbols that we believe will provide us with security, freedom, and pleasure. We make daily sacrifices, waking up early, enduring toxic environments, sacrificing our health and time with loved ones, all for the promise of future rewards. This is faith, a blind faith that leads us to postpone our lives, waiting for a paradise that never arrives. This behavior isn't much different from religious models that promise salvation after death. The economic system has simply transformed the symbols. It has swapped heaven for success, hell for poverty, tithes for taxes, and saints for billionaires. Moreover, money has become a measure of existential value. We no longer assess someone's nobility by their honor, wisdom, or compassion, but rather by their bank balance, job title, or net worth. This shift in values is both cultural and spiritual, as it links material prosperity to spiritual merit. It's a dangerous idea, yet one that is widely accepted. Many believe that wealth is always a sign of blessing, while poverty is viewed as a curse. This mindset perpetuates a system of exclusion, where those with abundance are seen as enlightened, and those with little are regarded as failures. This belief, though it appears economic, is deeply rooted in religious notions. Ancient religions understood the symbolic power of money. Jesus spoke more about money than about heaven and hell. Buddha renounced wealth in his quest for enlightenment. Hebrew prophets criticized unjust accumulation of riches. However, over time, the sacred and the financial became intricately intertwined. Churches amassed treasures, temples transformed into banks of faith and finance, and spiritual leaders began to function like CEOs. In many places, tithing turned into an obligation, blessings became commodities, and prosperity was treated as merchandise. The market and the altar swapped roles, yet they operate within the same symbolic realm, the human desire for security, transcendence, and recognition. Capitalism, in its rawest form, is a religion disguised as an economic system. It promises salvation through consumption, imposes sacred journeys of effort and merit, canonizes entrepreneurs, and demands blind obedience to its commandments: productivity, growth, competition, and accumulation. Its temples are shopping malls, its prayers are targets, its rituals are meetings, and its deadly sins are failure, slowness, and doubt. It even has its own apocalypse, bankruptcy, and its resurrection, reinvention. The faith in the market runs so deep that even after repeated crises, the system is restored, never questioned in its essence. However, this model is collapsing. Inequality is on the rise, nature is being depleted, and people are falling ill. Yet we continue to uphold the same symbolic system. Why? Because we still believe in it. Because we can't envision an alternative model. Money has become such a powerful force that it ensnares even those who reject it. Even those who criticize capitalism rely on it to survive. This reveals its true power. It's not just a tool, but a collective energetic field, a symbolic entity that thrives on our attention, our obedience, and our desires. But there's another way. When we recognize money as a symbol rather than an absolute truth, it loses some of its power over us. We can use it consciously without idolizing it. We can create economic models based on cooperation, regenerative abundance, and equitable distribution. We can honor the value of work without sacrificing our souls. We can integrate spirituality and prosperity without guilt or denial. Many movements are already doing this. Social currencies, solidarity economy, permaculture, impact businesses, universal basic income, decentralized blockchain. The world is starting to explore alternatives, even if the steps are still tentative. The key lies in redefining our perspective. Money is neither a villain nor a savior. It's simply a tool for amplification. In the hands of someone unaware, it can be destructive, but in the hands of someone enlightened, it can be liberating. The issue has never been the money itself, but the symbolic place we assign to it. When it takes center stage in our lives, everything becomes chaotic. However, when we view it as a flow of energy, life begins to flow again. The economy then transforms from a battleground into a dance, shifting from scarcity to celebration. Therefore, the invitation isn't to reject money, but to view it with fresh eyes. Recognize its symbolic nature, its history, and its role. Observe how it influences your life, what beliefs surround it, and what emotions it stirs up. Fear, guilt, pride, ambition. Which of these emotions truly belong to you? Which ones have been inherited? Which have been instilled by a culture that has learned to confuse value with price, essence with appearance, and abundance with accumulation? When these questions are asked honestly, the invisible web begins to unravel, and the conscious self starts to emerge. Consciousness is the silent point from which everything emerges. It can't be measured on graphs, traded on exchanges, cataloged by institutions, or defined by doctrines. Yet, it is the sole foundation that supports the entire experience of reality. Everything you think, feel, decide, and experience happens within it. Faith, culture, and economy are organized projections within the realm of human consciousness. They are creations that arise, evolve, and dissolve as collective perception expands. And still, this force is often overlooked. The ultimate frontier of freedom lies not in political control or technological revolution, but in the conscious mastery of one's own perception, because those who govern their own minds cannot be enslaved. Consciousness is not merely a product of the brain, as many believe. Rather, it is the very field in which the brain operates. Contemporary neuroscience is beginning to catch a glimpse of this, albeit cautiously. Research into altered states of perception, deep meditation, near-death experiences, and the therapeutic use of entheogenic substances suggests an expanded reality that cannot be explained solely by synapses or electrical impulses. There is something that observes thoughts, witnesses feelings, and recognizes mental patterns. This something is not an object, it is the subject. And here lies the true power of consciousness. It is both the stage and the observer, both the mirror and the reflection. For millennia, spiritual traditions from both the East and the West have clearly pointed to this dimension. The ancient yogis of India, the Taoist sages of China, the Sufi masters of Islam, and the Hermetic initiates of Egypt and Greece all converged on one essential truth. The awakening of consciousness is the only true path to liberation. The external world, with its rules, crises, and narratives, is merely a hall of mirrors. What truly matters is inner clarity, presence, and unconditioned perception. However, this teaching has been systematically suppressed by institutions that prefer repetition over inner revolution. A conscious being does not submit easily. They observe before they obey, question before they believe, and feel before they accept. When consciousness is dormant, a person becomes a mere reactor. They live in response to stimuli, conditioned by invisible triggers, unable to realize they are trapped within a set program. They repeat familiar patterns, suffer from inherited issues, consume out of reflex, work out of fear, and dream of what culture has taught them to desire. This state, while common, is not natural. It is induced. It is sustained by a precise mix of distraction, overload, trauma, and alienation. It's a way of life that prevents any pause. And without pause, there is no awareness. And without awareness, there is no freedom. When consciousness awakens, reality shifts. Not because the external world changes immediately, but because the internal filter dissolves. What was once seen as absolute truth reveals itself as a construct. What was unquestionable becomes fragile. What seemed solid transforms into a symbol. Pain ceases to be punishment and becomes information. Fear turns into a compass. Scarcity is exposed as a belief. Identity becomes fluid. The awakening of consciousness is a quiet revolution. It doesn't involve noise, but rather silence. It requires no dogmas, only presence. And this presence marks the beginning of a new way of living, no longer as a reaction to the world, but as a conscious cause. The education of consciousness isn't taught in schools. This is because a system built on obedience and consumption doesn't want individuals to think for themselves. Instead, it values memorization, production, and repetition. As a result, very few people learn to observe their own minds, distinguish between automatic thoughts and deep intuitions, or separate inherited emotions from authentic feelings. Consciousness remains illiterate, even among the most educated. That's why we see individuals with degrees, titles, and fame still feeling lost, reactive, insecure, and trapped in childish behavior patterns. Accumulated knowledge does not equate to awakened consciousness. Consciousness is also collective. There exists a shared field of perception that connects the minds, emotions, and intuitions of a given era. When this field is clouded by fear, greed, division, and trauma, it creates heavy realities, oppressive systems, and cycles of suffering. However, when this field is cleansed by presence, compassion, wisdom, and courage, it paves the way for new paradigms to emerge. World change begins with a shift in collective consciousness. This transformation doesn't happen through external imposition, but rather through internal contagion. An awakened being inspires another. A clear consciousness lights up the surroundings. Transformation occurs not through force, but through resonance. Many believe they are awake simply because they access different information, read spiritual books, practice meditation techniques, or reject traditional systems. However, true awakening isn't about the content. It's about the quality of attention. It's about recognizing the ego at work in real time. It's about noticing judgment as it arises without identifying with it. It's about observing anger without being consumed by it. It's about acknowledging the impulse to compete, to prove, to convince, and dissolving that impulse in the clarity of the present moment. Consciousness is subtle. It doesn't seek the spotlight. The more awake it becomes, the quieter it is. The more it expands, the humbler it grows, for it recognizes the vastness of what it doesn't know. The greatest challenge of consciousness is the illusion of separation. The ego believes it is an isolated self, battling against the world, defending itself from others, striving to win or merely survive. This mindset is the root of nearly all human suffering. When consciousness breaks through this illusion, unity emerges, not as a philosophical concept, but as a living experience. The boundary between self and other fades away. The suffering of others is felt as one's own. The planet is recognized as an extension of the body. Compassion transforms from a moral choice into a natural response. This unity forms the foundation for a new economy, a new culture, and a new spirituality. Everything begins here. This unified dimension of consciousness cannot be taught. It can only be pointed out. Each person must access it on their own. However, gaining this access requires a cleansing of beliefs, traumas, and attachments. It demands constant presence, radical self-observation, and above all, the willingness to symbolically die, letting go of the socially constructed persona so that the true self can emerge. This is the most challenging and liberating work a human can undertake, and it is also the most urgent. A world filled with unconscious individuals is a world at war, while a world of conscious people is a garden. When we realize that consciousness is at the core of everything, our focus shifts. We stop trying to fix the world superficially, through laws, systems, and institutions, and instead address the root, perception. A being that sees clearly acts wisely. A society that perceives itself with clarity builds fairer structures. External peace is a reflection of internal serenity. Abundance begins in the mind. Freedom is born from our perspective, and when that perspective is purified, it becomes the most powerful tool for transformation there is. Because where there is presence, there is no manipulation. Where there is consciousness, there is no domination. Where there is clarity, there is no fear. Consciousness is the space where all the other elements of this silent network operate. Faith, culture, and the economy function like software running within it. And like any system, they can be reprogrammed. But the first step is to recognize that we are part of a program. There are invisible lines of code guiding us, and automatic commands dictating our experiences. From this awareness arises true freedom, the ability to choose our own state of being, regardless of the circumstances. This freedom is what frightens control systems the most, because it cannot be bought, taught, or revoked. It simply exists. There's an invisible force at work behind the scenes of reality that most people prefer to ignore. Not because it's impossible to see, but because acknowledging its existence challenges everything we've been conditioned to believe about freedom, autonomy, and truth. This force is made up of historical structures, silent alliances, hidden dynasties, seemingly neutral institutions, and systems that disguise themselves as progress, democracy, philanthropy, and neutrality. It doesn't make the headlines. It doesn't need to. Its greatest strength lies in operating beneath the public's radar, governing the workings of countries, religions, markets, wars, and ideas. It's the game of the elites, a board that many refuse to acknowledge exists, yet it dictates the fate of billions without the majority even realizing they're part of it. The word elite carries weight and suspicion, yet it is rarely understood in depth. It's not just about the wealthy or the influential. It encompasses families, organizations, and conglomerates that span generations, accumulating not only financial capital, but also symbolic control, cultural influence, spiritual dominance, and the ability to shape collective perception. True power doesn't lie with those who have the most money, but with those who determine the value of that money. It isn't found in those who command armies, but in those who decide whom those armies should fight. Most importantly, real power resides in shaping the collective mindset, crafting the narratives that dictate what should be feared, desired, fought against, or followed. Elites have always understood something that the general public often forgets. Whoever controls the narrative controls the world. That's why, from ancient empires to modern corporations, dominant classes have consistently sought to align themselves with religion, culture, and the economic system. In Egypt, pharaohs were considered gods. In Rome, the emperor served as the high priest. During the medieval period in Europe, kings ruled by divine right. Today, the modern elite no longer need to proclaim their sanctity. They operate under the guise of rationality, technological progress, and a global order. Yet, their structure remains unchanged: to concentrate power, maintain control over the narrative, and ensure that others never see the strings being pulled. These elites operate on a transnational scale. They don't belong to any one country, nation, or flag. Instead, they function as networks through foundations, central banks, multilateral agencies, think tanks, major media outlets, and global corporations. They fund elections, shape public policies, control patents, manipulate data, spread ideologies, and maintain the illusion of diversity while standardizing thought. For them, governments are merely pawns, replaceable, negotiable, and disposable. The real game unfolds on a different level: the quiet manipulation of the very foundations of society. This isn't a conspiracy theory, it's a strategic reading of history. The major events that have shaped our world were rarely spontaneous. Revolutions, economic crises, cultural shifts, regime collapses, and the rise of leaders. These were often skillfully orchestrated, anticipated, or even engineered. Take the 2008 financial crisis, for instance. It primarily benefited those who were already wealthy. The pandemic accelerated the concentration of technological power. The digitization of finance is bringing us closer to a state of total surveillance. And behind all of this, there are interests at play that don't make the headlines, but operate in the quiet corridors where real decisions are made. The secret to the success of these elites lies in fragmentation. They keep the masses divided, occupied, and distracted. They create dichotomies, left and right, science and spirituality, capitalism and socialism, progress and tradition, to ensure that no one realizes these conflicts are all happening within a system they themselves designed. While people fight over scraps of representation, the structural game remains unchanged. It's the old tactic of divide and conquer, perfected through social engineering, behavioral psychology, and large-scale technological manipulation. The media is one of the most powerful tools available. It's not just about manipulating news, it's about shaping reality. The media doesn't just inform us, it influences our perception of what's possible. It defines what constitutes a crisis, what solutions are viable, what is acceptable, and what is considered madness. By being ever present, it becomes an invisible authority. Major media corporations are owned by a handful of groups which have financial and ideological interests intertwined with global elites. This means that the information reaching most people is, at best, biased. At worst, it is deliberately crafted to instill fear, create distractions, foster polarization, or encourage conformity. Another powerful force is the educational system. From a young age, we are taught to memorize, repeat, and obey. There's little emphasis on critical thinking, emotional intelligence, self-awareness, or intuitive creativity. Traditional schooling doesn't cultivate conscious individuals, it trains cogs for the system. It teaches us to compete, to fear mistakes, to seek external approval, and to conform to hierarchical structures. This isn't by chance, it's by design. The less a person knows themselves, the more vulnerable they are to external manipulation, and the more they rely on institutional validation, the more controllable they become. Spirituality has also been co-opted. Many so-called spiritual movements have been corrupted, infiltrated, or distorted to serve the interests of the same elites. Quick enlightenment is promised, prosperity without awareness, miracles in exchange for loyalty, gurus who become idols, and practices that alienate rather than liberate. As a result, even humanity's most sacred quest, the connection with the whole, is hijacked and turned into a commodity. This leads to confusion, skepticism, and a disconnection from one's own inner journey, which in turn perpetuates the control of the collective mind. A spiritual being who is disconnected from themselves is just as easily manipulated as a compulsive consumer. The elites don't control everything, but they wield enough power to keep the system running according to its own logic. They understand that true revolution begins in the mind. That's why everything is designed to prevent individuals from having the time, space, or encouragement to turn inward. The overwhelming stimulation, the rapid pace of information, the performance culture, and the obsession with distraction aren't just byproducts of modern life. They're tools of control. A being that is restless, that doesn't reflect or contemplate, remains asleep. And a being that is asleep doesn't question. Those who don't question simply consent. The awakening of collective consciousness poses a direct threat to this system. That's why, whenever genuine movements for inner expansion begin to gain momentum, efforts are made to co-opt, discredit, or eliminate them. History is filled with assassinated masters, distorted teachings, inverted symbols, and silenced leaders. An awakened population does not blindly accept official narratives. It demands transparency. It rejects manipulation. It seeks meaning beyond mere consumption. It becomes autonomous, and autonomy is precisely what a control system fears most. But there's a limit to manipulation. The human conscience, though subdued, cannot be extinguished. It always finds cracks to slip through. There are always those who see beyond the veil, who recognize the illusion, who feel the pull of truth. These individuals become beacons of light amidst the fog. They don't need to shout. Their mere existence is enough to disrupt the realm of ignorance. Light doesn't need to fight darkness. It simply needs to shine. That's why the elite fear a collective awakening so much. It doesn't require leaders, parties, or slogans. It's quiet, contagious, and inevitable. The world as we know it is fragmenting in real time. This isn't just happening in political or economic structures. It's affecting the very foundations of meaning, truth, identity, and purpose. There's a growing sense that something invisible is unraveling. While this feeling may be uncomfortable, it's not random. It signifies the collapse of the veils that have, for centuries, upheld the vast, silent web connecting and simultaneously controlling faith, culture, economy, and consciousness. The signs are everywhere, but to recognize them, one must be willing to look with fresh eyes, abandon the comfort of ignorance, and navigate the chaos that precedes any true rebirth. The first veil to begin to crumble was that of institutionalized faith. Across the globe, we are witnessing an unprecedented phenomenon, the decline of traditional religions. Churches, temples, synagogues, and mosques, no matter how grand they may still appear, no longer hold the same symbolic allure they once did. The number of people identifying as spiritual but not religious is growing exponentially. This shift isn't due to a loss of the search for the sacred. In fact, it's quite the opposite. It reflects a growing impatience with structures that have turned faith into control, transcendence into dogma, and truth into a commodity. New generations are no longer willing to accept a spirituality that excludes, judges, confines, or profits from the suffering of others. This represents a profound upheaval in one of the oldest pillars of the system. At the same time, the cultural veil is being lifted. The internet, with all its complexities, has helped to reveal what was once hidden: the relativity of values, the artificiality of customs, and the manipulation of narratives. Today, we can compare cultures in real time, recognize contradictions, question symbols, and reinterpret histories. This collapse of cultural homogeneity is indeed causing a collective identity crisis, but it also presents an unprecedented opportunity for conscious reconstruction. What was once passed down from generation to generation without question is now being evaluated, debated, and challenged. What seemed natural is proving to be cultural. What appeared to be tradition is turning out to be disguised trauma. The global economic system is collapsing on multiple fronts. This isn't just about financial cycles, inflation, or recession. What's crumbling is the very logic that drives it. An economy built on the premise of infinite growth on a finite planet, supported by an artificial scarcity structure where a few accumulate wealth while many struggle to get by. The climate crisis, the breakdown of supply chains, unsustainable debt levels, the depletion of natural resources, and collective burnout, all of these indicators point to the end of an era. The more the system tries to sustain itself, the more it reveals its obsolescence. The stark contrast between the extreme wealth of a few and the degrading poverty of the majority has become symbolically unsustainable. The myth of perpetual progress no longer holds water. But perhaps the greatest collapse is in our very perception of reality. The rise of fake news, algorithmic manipulation, and the fragmentation of truth has ushered in an era where trust is hard to come by. Instead of fostering wisdom, the overwhelming amount of information has led to confusion. People are exhausted, skeptical, and anxious. This crisis of trust in institutions, the media, science, leadership, and even interpersonal relationships reveals that the veil of symbolic authority is also crumbling. Without this authority, individuals are called to take on a new role, that of the protagonist in their own worldview. However, few are prepared for this leap, as it demands a level of self-awareness, discernment, and courage that has never before been required on such a large scale. The global pandemic accelerated everything. It acted as a catalyst for the unraveling of illusions. It forced the world to pause, reflect, and reassess priorities. It laid bare inequalities, systemic vulnerabilities, and toxic dependencies. It revealed that true stability cannot exist in a system built on falsehoods. While some raked in billions, others lost everything. As calls for unity echoed, exclusionary policies were put into place. The mask has fallen, figuratively and literally, and even though many wish to return to normal, that normal no longer exists. The wound has been exposed, the system has been stripped bare, and the memory of the collapse is etched into the collective consciousness. Another clear symptom of the collapse of our veils is the surge of existential crises. We've never talked so much about anxiety, depression, burnout, and inner emptiness. This isn't just about clinical issues, it's a collective spiritual pain. There's a disconnection from purpose, a loss of meaning in a world that seems to revolve around goals that don't nourish the soul. This deep anguish isn't pathological, it's a sign of a healthy consciousness. It's the cry of our inner selves against the symbolic prison imposed by a culture that reduces life to mere performance and consumption. It's the quiet refusal to continue living a script that wasn't written by our own souls. And this cry, even if still subdued, already resonates as a seed of transformation. The current generation of youth is perhaps the most powerful reflection of this collapse. Young people who feel out of place, who reject norms, who refuse labels, and who won't accept the world as it is. Many are labeled as lost, unmotivated, or rebellious. But the truth is, they are awakening to the emptiness of the promises made to them. They don't just want a job, a house, or retirement. They seek truth, connection, and freedom. They sense that the system is crumbling, even if they can't quite articulate it. As a result, they are experimenting with new ways of living, more fluid, more sustainable, and more authentic. It's no surprise that many are turning to minimalism, nomadism, alternative spirituality, and innovative forms of education. They are the heralds of a new era. The exponential rise in people seeking meditation, retreats, integrative therapies, astrology, ancestral wisdom, and self-discovery is not just a trend. It's a direct response to the collapse of old foundations. When external structures lose their credibility, humanity is compelled to turn inward. This return to introspection is the clearest sign that something new is emerging. However, this emergence can be painful. It requires letting go. It demands renouncing identities. It calls for unlearning much of what we've been taught. The rational mind resists. The ego fights back. Culture may condemn it, but the soul recognizes the truth. Those who heed this inner voice begin to navigate the collapse with clarity. Art also reflects this shift. Works that once adhered to entertainment formulas now convey deep anxieties, apocalyptic visions, and hybrid utopias. Films, music, literature, and series all bear the weight of a world in transition. Even in the most commercial expressions, signs of disruption are evident. The collective consciousness is beginning to recognize the false, the empty, and the superficial. Stories that once captivated now feel stale. This pressure drives culture to seek new meanings and fresh ways to narrate the human experience. Art, as a mirror of the collective soul, reveals the collapse and highlights the cracks through which light begins to seep. Perhaps the clearest sign that the veils are lifting is the growing number of people asking questions that once seemed unthinkable. Who am I really? What is real? What's the purpose of all this? Why do we follow a model that clearly isn't working? Is there another way? When these questions are asked sincerely, they hold revolutionary power. They seek not just answers, but also create internal spaces, spaces of silence, listening, and contemplation. In these spaces, the silent web begins to dissolve, as it only exists as long as no one names it. Thus, the collapse is a blessing in disguise. It marks the beginning of a new cycle, still formless, still vulnerable, but inevitable. The collapse of the veils signals not just the end of a cycle, but the dawn of a new fabric. A new tapestry is quietly taking shape on the fringes of society, in the gaps of our cities, and in the hearts of those who dare to dream differently. This tapestry is woven not from control, but from connection, not from scarcity, but from regenerative abundance, not from hierarchy, but from collaborative networks. This new reality will not be a reformed reflection of the old system. It emerges from a different consciousness, a new way of perceiving, feeling, and relating to existence. It's a paradigm that integrates faith, culture, economy, and awareness into a new symbolic architecture where human beings transition from mere cogs in a machine to co-authors of their own story. The new paradigm begins within each individual. It doesn't start with decrees, laws, or institutional reforms, but with subtle shifts in perception. When someone chooses to live with presence instead of rushing through life, they are already weaving this new reality. When they opt for cooperation over competition, a new connection is formed. When they let go of comforting lies and open themselves to unsettling truths, something realigns in the collective consciousness. This is how the new fabric emerges, not through loud revolutions, but through thousands of small conscious actions that, when combined, create an irreversible shift in humanity's vibrational frequency. In the spiritual realm, this new narrative emerges as a form of spirituality that is experiential rather than institutional. It's not about dogmas or sects. It's about direct experiences with the sacred. People from diverse cultures are accessing expanded states of consciousness without the need for intermediaries, gurus, or temples. Practices like meditation, ancestral rituals, moments of silence, reconnecting with nature, and the responsible use of power plants are all helping individuals reconnect with their authentic spiritual selves. This spirituality doesn't require a label, which is why it doesn't oppose anything. It brings people together. It embraces. It awakens. And with it, a renewed sense of unity with the whole comes to life. Culturally, the new narrative expresses itself through plurality. The era of symbolic monoculture is coming to an end. The world is beginning to once again value ancestral wisdom, indigenous cosmologies, forgotten myths, and silenced knowledge. But this revival isn't about folkloric preservation. It's about re-enchanting reality. A culture of reconnection is emerging, where art, science, and spirituality intertwine once more, just as they did in ancient civilizations. This is a culture that defines humanity not merely as consumers or citizens, but as beings in a state of expansion. It celebrates diversity without diluting identity, honors the local while embracing the global, and sees beauty as a source of healing, with symbols serving as bridges between worlds. In the economic realm, this new narrative is starting to move away from the foundations of scarcity, competition, and profit maximization. Emerging models focus on regeneration, justice, circularity, and holistic well-being. Purpose-driven companies are beginning to replace extractive corporations. Social currencies, time-based economies, digital cooperatives, decentralized exchange systems, and basic income projects are emerging as viable alternatives to the traditional financial model. The goal is no longer endless growth, but rather conscious flourishing. It's not about accumulation anymore, but about sharing. Yes, we aim to prosper, but with balance, ethics, and meaning. These new economies don't reject money. Instead, they reconfigure it as a means rather than an end. They view it as a tool for exchange among conscious beings rather than a symbol of status or power. This is an economy of being, not just of having. It acknowledges the invisible value of care, time, listening, presence, art, healing, and silence. Everything that the old model dismissed as unproductive is now recognized as essential. This shift in values redefines what it means to work, create, collaborate, and live. In doing so, it realigns the social structure to a more human, compassionate, and authentic frequency. In education, this narrative unfolds in new ways of learning. Free schools, integrative pedagogies, learning communities, project-based education, intuitive teaching, and methods centered on self-awareness and purpose are beginning to thrive. The goal shifts from merely preparing individuals for the job market to nurturing fully realized, critical, creative human beings who are in touch with their true selves. Education now encompasses the body, emotions, and soul. Children are seen not as empty vessels but as powerful potential. Mistakes are no longer punished. Instead, they become part of the learning process. Curiosity is encouraged, and active listening is valued. Thus, a new generation is emerging, not as a mere replica of the previous one, but as the seed of an unprecedented world. In science, the mechanistic paradigm is giving way to a more holistic perspective. Quantum physics has already revealed that reality is interconnected, that the observer influences the observed, and that everything vibrates, pulses, and exists in relation to one another. Integrative medicine acknowledges that health is not merely the absence of disease, but rather a harmony between body, mind, and spirit. Deep ecology teaches us that the planet is not just a resource, but a living organism. Transpersonal psychology incorporates the spiritual dimensions of human experience. The science of the future will not stand in opposition to spirituality. Instead, it will be its ally. Both seek the same goal, to understand the mysteries of existence. The new science will embrace humility, able to say, "I don't know," without arrogance. And in that uncertainty, it will find space for the sacred. Technologies are no longer just ends in themselves. They have become bridges. Instead of replacing humans, they enhance our capabilities. Artificial intelligence, virtual reality, blockchain, and quantum computing, all of these can be harnessed to strengthen conscious networks, decentralize power, facilitate healing, expand access to knowledge, preserve ecosystems, and integrate cultures. Technology will no longer serve as a tool for domination, but as a means of liberation, provided it is used ethically, with soul and with awareness. The true impact of any invention is defined not by its power, but by the intention behind it. The new technological landscape will be driven by purpose rather than profit. In the realm of human relationships, we are witnessing the collapse of outdated models of love, family, friendship, and work. This opens the door to more authentic, fluid, and conscious connections. Relationships founded on choice rather than need, in truth, not based on expectation, in freedom, not possession. This shift demands emotional maturity, responsible affection, and transparency. It requires confronting pain, boundaries, and our shadows. Yet, it allows us to forge connections that nurture, heal, and inspire. The new world will be built on networks of affection, not survival contracts, because, at its core, the greatest antidote to the old system is true love, the kind that includes, transforms, and liberates. The new narrative isn't a utopia. It already exists. It thrives in eco-villages, urban collectives, artistic projects, spiritual networks, digital communities, educational experiences, healing centers, listening spaces, and unexpected gatherings. Yes, it's still fragile, but it's very much real, and it's growing. As more people awaken, it gains strength. As more hearts come together, it unfolds. The old world may try to hold on, but it's only a matter of time. No structure can withstand the transformation of the consciousness that supports it, and that transformation is already underway. At the end of every journey of revelation, one question remains inevitable. What do we do now that everything has been seen? After piercing through the veils that shrouded faith as conditioning, culture as programming, economy as symbolic belief, and consciousness as the foundation of all experiences, there's no turning back. Something has been touched, recognized, and that changes everything. The notion of separation between spirituality and matter, between the individual and the collective, between inner life and the outer world, loses all meaning. What remains is clarity. You were never truly disconnected. The silent network is not just a system of control. It is, at once, a mirror and proof that you are part of something much larger. And now, with this awareness, responsibility can no longer be passed off to others. You're already connected. You always have been. The issue has never been about entering the network, but about awakening within it. Now that the invisible threads have been revealed and the symbolic patterns decoded, a new kind of decision emerges. Quiet, intimate, and non-transferable. This choice isn't made with words, but with presence. It doesn't rely on applause, validation, or external outcomes. True change doesn't begin with grand gestures, but with subtle internal realignments. With every thought you question, every belief you dissolve, and every action you transform into awareness, you shift the collective field. And that is revolution. The strength of the old system lay in its invisibility. It thrived because it went unnoticed. Now that it's been exposed, its power begins to wane. But don't be fooled. It will keep fighting to survive. It will wield fear, guilt, distraction, polarization, and seduction. It will don new disguises, adopt fresh languages, and even infiltrate the most well-meaning initiatives. Because control doesn't want to die. The old world will struggle until its last breath. Yet this struggle is already evidence of its decline. Only those who are losing ground fight back. And that ground is being reclaimed, not through weapons or impositions, but by a quietly growing presence of conscious beings who refuse to remain unaware. The real choice now is where you direct your attention. Attention is the most powerful energy in the human experience. Whatever you nurture with it grows. Every network that thrives does so on attention. When you focus on fear, it expands. When you focus on beauty, it blossoms. When you focus on scarcity, it intensifies. When you focus on inner abundance, it overflows into the world. This isn't about toxic positivity or denying pain. It's about energetic maturity. You already understand that everything is symbolic, that everything is a language, and that everything vibrates according to your internal frequency. Now, it's up to you to consciously choose what to nurture. This choice doesn't require an audience. The world is overflowing with speeches, promises, and rhetoric about change. The new narrative strengthens in silence, in the invisible gestures, in the decisions that go unnoticed, in the compassion that doesn't seek recognition, in the integrity that remains intact even when no one is watching. Because it's in this unseen realm that the quiet network is reconfigured. It's where the old loses its grip. It's where the new comes to life. Every elevated thought, every transformed emotion, every action inspired by truth. All of this creates ripples that resonate far beyond what the rational mind can comprehend. You are never acting alone. There is always a resonance. You are already part of the new network. It doesn't matter if you have resources, titles, followers, or influence. What truly matters is your presence. What matters is your inner willingness to walk with awareness, even when the world is still moving in fear. What matters is your quiet strength in upholding the unseen, trusting the unspoken, and staying true to your truth even when everything seems to be falling apart. This is spiritual leadership. And the world needs, now more than ever, leaders who don't seek to lead, but simply strive to live authentically, inspiring others through their actions rather than their words. Have you noticed that the structures that shaped you are not permanent? That the stories you were told can be rewritten? That the fears that once held you captive can be dissolved? Now you might ask yourself, what do I truly believe? What do I genuinely value? What do I really want to create? Because in this new cycle, no one can hide behind collective ignorance any longer. The field has expanded, the light has entered, the veil has lifted, and a new awareness calls for new attitudes. It will no longer be possible to cling to old habits without confronting the internal discomfort of inconsistency. The soul won't allow it anymore. It demands your full presence. Full presence is a commitment to truth, to silence, to listening. It means being wholly engaged in the moment. It's about acting from a place deeper than the ego. It's living with purpose, not as an external goal, but as an internal coherence. When you live this way, everything around you begins to shift. People draw closer, situations change, time feels different. Reality bends for those who walk with an awakened heart. At this point, you no longer need to seek belonging. You realize you were never truly separate. The web that connects everything already pulses within you. Your role is no longer to find the path, it is to be the path. This new way of being requires courage. Courage to disappoint others' expectations. Courage to say no to what no longer resonates. Courage to start over. Courage to look at oneself with honesty. Courage to let go of old dreams that no longer make sense. Courage to trust in the unseen, even when the world seems to be falling apart. Courage to love genuinely, because loving genuinely is the most revolutionary act in a system that thrives on fear. To love is to say, I see, and those who see can no longer be manipulated. You've made it this far because deep down you already knew. You sensed it. You felt it. This video hasn't brought you anything new. It has simply named what was already there, waiting beneath the surface. It has shone a light on what your soul has been whispering all along. Now, you have a choice. You can choose to ignore it, or you can choose to live from this newfound awareness. You can continue to be swept away by the old ways, or you can become a turning point, a link in the transition, a spark of the new. The choice is yours. It always has been. And even if it seems small, it resonates throughout the whole, because at this very moment, thousands of others are making the same choice. Together, silently, we are reshaping the destiny of humanity. You're already connected. There's no turning back now. The question is, how will you use this connection? Will you continue to repeat old patterns, cling to outdated beliefs, and support systems that have already collapsed from within? Or will you, with humility and determination, begin to engage with the world in a new way? Will you see others as brothers and sisters? Will you treat the earth as sacred? Will you use your voice as a tool for truth? Will you transform what you do, what you consume, what you teach, what you think, and what you desire? Because the world doesn't change by decree. It changes when the hearts of those who inhabit it change. A silent web has always been there, hidden in plain sight. But now, it's emerging as a vibrant possibility for conscious connection. Faith, culture, economy, and awareness no longer need to serve as tools of control. They can become the foundations of a new humanity. The time of separation is coming to an end. The time for remembrance has arrived. Remember who we are, what we are capable of, and why we are here. If you've made it this far, it's because this call is yours too. Breathe. Be still, allow this truth to settle within you, and then move forward. The world needs you awake, whole, present, now. Mind unfettered. Now that you've seen the invisible threads that shape your reality, tell me in the comments, what veil has lifted for you today? Do you feel like you're already weaving your new conscious narrative? Or do you still find yourself caught in old patterns? Let's manifest a new awareness together. It all begins when we share what we've awakened to. Share your deepest insights in the comments. They could inspire and awaken others like you. And if this journey has opened your eyes, then you're ready for the next step. Click now to watch the Book of 33 Steps, the hidden map Jesus left for enlightenment. Discover the forgotten map Jesus left behind for true enlightenment. The next chapter of this journey begins here, and you won't want to miss it. With wisdom, courage, and awareness, we move forward together, because a liberated mind can no longer be confined. With love, Mind Unfettered.